Peace, and Dignity, Africa Great Lakes Action Network, the Rusesabagina Foundation, as well as Friends of the Congo. We are advocacy groups committed to justice and peace in Africa, coming together for this press conference as the world marks the first anniversary of the kidnapping, illegal transfer, detention, and sham trial of the Hotel Rwanda hero, Paul Rusesabagina, and an alarming rise in cases of political repression by President Paul Kagame and the ruling Rwandan Patriotic Front. So we come here in front of the embassy to stand witness, to say no more, enough is enough, and to raise our voices. We ask all journalists joining us who have questions to please use the Q&A function. We will have an opportunity to hear your questions after a slate of phenomenal speakers. So let me just tell you who we have gathered today. First, I am Amira Woods, representing Africans Rising for Justice, Peace, and Dignity, as well as the Africa Advocacy Network. I will serve as your moderator.
Excuse me.
We've been dealing with this all year. We're walking on the sidewalk in front of the embassy. There will be people coming as happen. We will continue. So thank those who are joining virtually for your patience with us. We will begin this press conference with Dr. Bouquet from the Africa Action Rusesabagina. We will have Paul Harris, who is part of the legal team for Free Rusesabagina, Simon Villainous from No Business with Genocide, and the Lantos Foundation will have a representative today. So we ask you to stay tuned, get your questions ready. We will have a slate of deep information, those closest to it, and we'll come back to this Q&A. Next, we turn to Claude. Claude from Lantos Foundation. Welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Amira. Give me 1 second. Just clean up a little bit. Thank you. Thank you, Amira. Thank you, everybody that's gathered here, and those of you who are online. My name is Claude Gatebutke. I am a Rwanda national. I'm also a human rights activist and executive director of the African Great Lakes Action Network. And on this anniversary, this 1-year anniversary of the Paul Rusesabagina illegal kidnapping from Dubai to Rwanda for a sham trial, tried for terrorism by a terrorist government and a terrorist president, Paul Kagame. We need to remember the lessons we learned from the genocide in 1994, but the acts that Paul Rusesabagina and many others did and committed during that time. Paul Rusesabagina sheltered people during the genocide when the whole world looked the other way as the genocide was happening. When so many people inside of Rwanda, still doing it today, decided to be bystanders, watch it happen and do nothing. Watch it happen and say nothing. And today, let today be the very last time that you see an injustice and keep silent. So what's happening in Rwanda today, since and even before the kidnapping of Paul Rusesabagina, the repression and oppression of Rwandan people is at an all-time high. And I'm just gonna cite a few examples. As you can see on the banner here, we have a few people that are highlighted. We've got the case of course, Paul Rusesabagina with his kidnapping. We also have Aimable Karasira, who was a university professor until he was fired from being a professor for criticizing the Rwandan government on his YouTube channel. There is Yvonne Idamange, who is also in prison. Both of them are in prison for simply making remarks on YouTube. There are journalists who are in prison, who have been in prison for years today, and are still serving time, with some of them without trial. There's also Meeting of Yater that is also on this display. He was arrested in November of 2020. So this day, no one has seen him in public. He has not been to court. Imagine, right here in Washington, D.C., somebody getting arrested, not seeing court for almost a year. In 3 months, it'll be a year that Meeting of Yater is being in detention. And all kinds of new people are being arrested. There is a case of Gilbert Chapa. It's the newest case. The guy wrote a letter to President Kagame, the dictator in Rwanda, and talked about the pain of losing his parents and his siblings and everything. Killed by the RPF, the Rwanda Patriotic Front, the party in power in Rwanda, the party that runs this embassy right here, this place right here that we're standing in front of. The Rwanda Patriotic Front has killed so many people inside and outside of Rwanda. My generation, there's a study that shows that people aged between 10 and 25 in the years 2005 to 2017, that's people that were born somewhere between 1979 and 1980, to people born in 2007, that nearly 600,000 people have been disappeared inside of Rwanda. So this is the picture of Rwanda under Kagame and under the RPF. But what does this have to do with now Washington, D.C.? Why are we doing this in D.C.? Excuse me for a second. Please bear with us. All right. So I was saying, what does this have to do with America? What does this have to do with DC? Let me start with this embassy in the government of Rwanda. They conduct surveillance on Rwandan nationals inside and outside of the country. From inside this embassy, we have cases of diplomats stalking, surveilling, and following people in America, following American citizens. That is a crime that's being committed and commissioned inside of this embassy. Secondly, the U.S. is a supporter and provides funding. It is a donation to the Rwandan government. So this is every American person's business. This is your money. This is your dime that is being used to oppress and harm people. Your money is being used. Your tax dollars is being used to support a dictator that's not only killing people inside of his own country, Rwanda, but also outside in the Congo. There are more than 6 million people killed in the Congo that have nothing to do with Rwanda. This is what the U.S. is funding. A colossal number. The deadliest conflict since World War II is being carried out, and some of it is being financed by U.S. citizens who do not know. And lastly, let me just talk American citizens, but also not just few American citizens, citizens of donor nations, the US, the European Union, the UK, Canada, and all other countries that fund the Rwandan government. A lot of it is happening because citizens are unaware. And it's great that we have this, that we have this type of press conferences and the media can cover this and bring it to you. When you get it, you're a witness. When you're a witness, you're responsible. When you see something, you're responsible to actually take action. As a witness, do and be like Rusesabagina and others who actually took action when people were being harmed. To hand this off, I have to say that a lot of people is perpetrated because there's so much indifference. Indifference today and indifference in 1994 in the genocide in Rwanda, and indifference in all of these years is when people see violence, people see injustice, and they remain silent. And the easiest way to do it today is to remain silent, to see it and remain silent. And those who are aware of injustices and remain silent and do nothing are complicit in the violence. Silence is violence. Silence is complicity in the crime. And I ask everybody that's following this, not just the press, to show up and show out, to speak up, and speak up. Make sure these names, Rusesabagina, Emable Karasira, Idamange, Gilbert Chaka, Mitino Viater, Deo Mushaidi, and countless other prisoners of conscience in Rwanda are heard. And for that, Rwandan leadership must be sanctioned for the crimes they're committing against these people. And that has all to do with us as individuals, us as Rwandans, but also you and us as Americans and as citizens of countries that are donor nations. Thank you so much for this time.
Thank you so much, Claude, for that powerful reminder of all of the needs, all of the families that are facing such horrific pain with the disappearance and sadly death of their loved ones. We wish we had time to have each of those families represented at this press conference today. But we just want to remind, particularly the leaders of paying attention, there are so many families dealing with this force as we speak. Do all you can to cover these stories, to make sure that their names are known. The one name that around the world people already know, we call him the Hotel Rwanda hero, Paul Rusesabagina. We are so grateful to have two of his family members, Karim and Anais, joining us today on Zoom, and we're hoping that they can go next to share in 5 minutes or so their reflections on this momentous, deeply sad and painful day, the case of their dad, Paul Rusesabagina. We turn to you now, Anais and Karim. Karim, please go ahead.
Hello. Hi, my name is Karine Kanimba.
And I'm Anais Kanimba.
We are two of the 6 children of Paul Rusesabagina. 1 year ago today, or 1 year ago around this date, our father, Paul Rusesabagina, was kidnapped by the Rwandan dictator, Paul Kagame. He was kidnapped and tortured, then denied of all his legal rights. Then he was held in solitary confinement for over 260 days. This is simply because our father dared to speak up. He dared to call out the human rights abuses being perpetrated by the Rwandan dictator, Paul Kagame. For the past 15 years, our father has been going around the world, speaking at conferences, at universities, teaching students and people around the world to call out injustice, like he did in 1994 during the Rwandan genocide. And he did just that. And that is precisely why the dictator of Rwanda wants to silence him and put him away from the public eye, because he dared to speak up. He dared to challenge them. He dared to call out their human rights abuses. Today's press conference is a demonstration. It's a clear message to the dictator of Rwanda and all those who stand by in silence that we will no longer stand by and that we will call this out.
And so I'd like to add that we could not have done our campaign. We could not have fought by ourselves. This was a campaign and we're still fighting together. And that's why we're here to also thank everyone who's joined us in the last year to help us get our father free, to help us call all the injustice happening in the Rwanda to my father, but also to all the other Rwandans, including Karasira or Ndamage and many others. So we thank you all. It's with the truth and justice that we'll be able to beat this kind of dictatorship. And we could not do it alone. So that's why we're here as a family, but also as Rwandans, calling out to the international community, to our other African brothers and sisters, to join us in this campaign, to join us in this end of dictatorship, end of injustice, end of death and killing, and help us get our that back. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Karine and Anaïs. Thank you so much for the pain you endured on behalf of your family. Our hearts go out to all of you. Please know that you are not alone. Our next speaker, we're so honored to have part of the legal team for we have human rights attorney, Peter Harris, who is here with us to share details of the case.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. Just want to make a few observations, talk a little bit about what's occurred, and also where do we go from here. So, as many of you know, we expected a verdict, or we hoped for a verdict. The original deadline was a few days ago, on the 20th of August. That's been extended now for at least 30 more days to September 20th. It may be extended again, I hope not. And I'm not going to prejudge what the verdict will be, what the verdict outcome will be. But I think most people who are aware of what's transpired are not taking out. But in many ways, there already have been verdicts, at least 4 of them by my count. And I'll talk a little bit about what they are, where those verdicts have been held, and then where do we go from here in terms of the future. So first, there's been a finding, I think, that Paul was abducted unlawfully. I think he's been abducted in violation of the U.S. kidnapping statute and also under international law. We were told that there was an international warrant. There has been no international warrant. There was no attempt to deport him from the United States lawfully through deportation procedures that, in fact, have been used for several Rwanda nationals to be returned back to Rwanda to face trial. And the standard for deporting him from the United States is much lower than the beyond reasonable doubt standard that the Rwandan government will have to apply under its own laws, let alone international law, for finding somebody guilty of a criminal conduct. So one would think, were the evidence there, they would have just sought to deport him rather than resort to the abduction by means of under what the U.S. kidnapping statute calls embegglement, or tricking or luring somebody into crossing a border against their will and against their intention. Second, I think there's been a verdict that he's been denied a fair trial. There's been a denial of the presumption of innocence, which is his right under international law. And when I say international law, there are several treaties that come into bear. I won't go into all of them, but just keep in mind that the Rwandan government, to its credit, is a signatory of these treaties, including the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights and also the UN Convention against torture and inhumane and cruel treatment. And so it does in fact apply to the Rwandan government as well. There's no debate about that, and I don't think the Rwandan government will debate that. So anyway, he was denied the presumption of guilt. Several Rwandan government officials at the highest levels in which videotape called him a criminal long before, even before the trial commenced, let alone before any verdict by a Rwandan court has pronounced him to be a criminal. There's been his right to international counsel, including myself and my 2 colleagues, Kate Gibson, repeatedly the opportunity to participate in the trial as strategic counsel, to advise, to raise issues with respect to his international human rights and due process rights. And we've been denied that opportunity repeatedly. There's no attorney-client privilege whatsoever, and that continues to this day. Every single communication written down by his attorneys from us, from his local counsel, even anything of a recording device to and from have been seized by the Rwandan courts and examined. So there's been absolutely no observations, right, to the right to the attorney-client privilege. And also no opportunity to review any documents and accept a lot of them and prepare for trial. So that was the reason why Paul withdrew from the trial, because there was no due process rights, not even minimal. The third verdict I think that's been rendered over the last few months is that he was tortured and submitted to cruel and inhumane treatment. I'm not going to get into the debate about what constitutes torture versus what constitutes just cruel and inhumane treatment. The bottom line is that all of these things are barred by international law, both customary international law I would maintain, and also the convention, which I mentioned. Paul was taken from the airport where he had been abducted, subjected to inhumane and cruel treatment for 4 days. The Rwandan government has never denied that. And then he was subjected to an additional 200 feet. Technically, that ended about a month or so ago, a couple months ago, I guess, at this point. He's still not allowed, as a practical matter, to engage with other prisoners, to speak with them, to talk with them. He's still shunned. So he's, for all practical purposes, he's still treated in isolation. And again, there's no debate about that either. And as a result, his physical condition, as many of you know, he's a cancer survivor, but the cancer's in remission. There's no such a thing as curing cancer. That's not been monitored. He's been deprived of his Belgian medicines since the time of his incarceration, despite repeated attempts by the family, by local council, by the Belgian embassy to try to get him those medicines. We don't know what medicines he's being treated with in prison. He suffers from dangerous fluctuation in terms of his blood pressure. He complains of being dizzy, losing his balance, inability to focus, etc. So he's in a difficult state. And again, I think that verdict has been rendered that this kind of treatment is unlawful and against his human rights. And the final verdict, I think, ironically, that's been rendered is that the trial simply has been unfair, and if anything, it's established Paul's innocence. Now, that's not our burden of proof, of course. It remains with the government, any government, to establish beyond a reasonable doubt a defendant's guilt. But one of my colleagues who's been monitoring the trial, the entire trial, several colleagues actually, and have reviewed the trial transcripts, and we're in the process of that. And I have seen some of these as well. It's overwhelmingly about the co-defendants, the testimony, very little about Paul, and even some testimony about Paul initially has been recanted by witnesses who described how they were either coerced or promised something that wasn't delivered, that they were subjected to themselves inhumane treatment, and that therefore they decided to speak out and recant their testimony. So these four verdicts, I think, are stunning, and they're frightening, but I think they're pretty much solidified. And where have these verdicts been rendered? And I think they've been rendered in three places. First, I think the international community, with respect to governments, have rendered these verdicts. There's an appreciation on Capitol Hill, U.S. Congress, both House and Senate, bicameral, as well as Democrat and Republican leading figures of both House Foreign Affairs committees and leading national security committees, as well as in the Senate, wrote a letter to President Kagame last December asking for Paul's immediate release and mentioning and being, disturbed by the failure by the Rwandan government to observe and seek deportation lawfully under U.S. law, as has been done in the past. That was followed up by an even larger number of senators and Congress people more recently, writing to Secretary Clinton asking the immediate release and expressing distress that about what's taking place with respect to the trial, and also asking for Paul's immediate humanitarian release. It's not just the U.S. Congress, it's the Belgian Parliament, the EU Parliament, and others that are recognizing that both the initial abduction of Paul and his trial have violated his due process of human rights. In addition, you have multiple human rights organizations that have spoken out already. Human Rights Foundation, the International Bar Association, the American Bar Association / Quinny Foundation, and we speak more to that, and others who have expressed, have condemned, and expressed their concern about the fundamental failure to observe due process of human rights. And finally, I think you have a growing understanding in the media and the public at large, and this is going to grow, and I think it's going to grow exponentially in the coming months, that Paul's rights and human rights have been violated. Initially, you had to have, well, the government says this, and his family says that, or his lawyer said that. You know, that's to be understood. The press has to cover both sides. But what's emerged over the last year, and I think is going to emerge after the verdict and sentence, is a consensus that there simply wasn't enough evidence to substantiate the charges against him. Not only that there was a lack of due process, but the actual evidence simply does not support any of the substantial allegations against him. So what comes next? I'm going to end very, very briefly now. I think you're going to see two things. I think first, people already have and will continue to hold the Rwandan government responsible for Paul's health and personal security, no matter what happens with respect to going forward. The Rwandan government is responsible for his health and personal security. Second, respectfully, I think the Rwandan government has misjudged the past. They have, I think, believed that this would somehow generate public opinion against Paul and perhaps in their favor. I think that's a woeful misjudgment. And I think going forward, what I think can remedy this situation for Paul and the Rwandan government is to start to consider a humanitarian release as a humanitarian gesture. There's plenty of precedent for this internationally. There's precedent for it in Rwanda, and I think that there would be a growing public outcry and call for that kind of gesture on behalf of the Rwandan government. It would be appropriate given Paul's health. It would be appropriate given what's transpired in terms of the trial. It would be appropriate in terms of how Paul has been treated and mistreated. And it would be appropriate for the Rwandan government to try to capture some of its legitimacy and its international reputation by making this gesture and freeing Paul. With that, let me turn it over to some of my colleagues, and I thank you very much.
Use that duct tape. Strong.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Peter, not only for those powerful reminders of why it's important for the world to pay attention to this case, but for bringing your legal expertise, your brilliance, your human rights commitment, and your heart to ensure that Paul Rusesabagina, the Rwanda hero, is free. That's a show trial. Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you for your courage. We now turn to another courageous ally, Simon Villainous, with no business with genocide. Simon is a long-term human rights activist on issues of genocide in Burma to issues around genocide. So we are so grateful for him to be here and for all that his network has done on the Rusesabagina case and the case of political repression in Rwanda. So, Simon, the podium is yours. Thank you, everyone, for patience. We're cleaning in between for COVID protocol, keeping everyone safe, but we're so grateful you're all here.
You have to speak loud.
Thank you. My name is Simon Villainous, and I'm the director of No Business with Genocide. And we're committed to stopping and preventing genocide and other crimes against humanity by stopping the flow of money to regimes that commit these acts. We also raise awareness of the issue. Paul Rusesabagina's actions during the 1994 Rwanda genocide made all the difference for the 1,264 people who would have been killed had he not helped save them. We need to do everything we can to help him now. His example is one that we should celebrate and promote. People from all around the world have rallied in support of Paul. We published a petition to US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, asking him to raise Paul Rusesabagina's case with the Rwandan president, Paul Kagame. Since we published that petition, thousands of people around the world have signed that petition. They've shared it through their social media, they've shared it with their friends. A number of people have left comments. Here are a few. Paul Rusesabagina is one of the bravest heroes of the 21st century. He is a total hero for Rwanda and for the world, for honesty, for human rights, for children, for sustainability, for social viability, and for equality. His courage saved many lives and kept him at risk. He should be lauded and freed from any and all incarceration. Mr. Secretary of State, I implore you to please do all in your power to pressure President Kagame to release Paul Rusesabagina and to end the politically motivated, illegal, and improper incarceration and sham trial of this world-renowned humanitarian and great hero. Dear Secretary Blinken, the illegal abduction and trial of Paul Rusesabagina by the madman Kagame must not stand. Please act to secure Paul's safe release and return home. Dear Secretary Blinken, please immediately follow up on the 41 senators and members of Congress asking that you act to free Paul Rusesabagina and to return him home to San Antonio. Thank you. Dear sir, please push the Rwandan government to release Paul. He is innocent and wrongly accused. This wrongdoing must be corrected. Paul is not only a brave hero in the Rwanda genocide, he's a permanent US resident and Belgian citizen. He's also a Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient. If the leader of another country is allowed to kidnap citizens of other nations, no one is safe. This is a precedent that cannot be allowed to stand. We stand with Paul Rusesabagina, his family, and everyone who fights to save others from genocide and other mass atrocities. And we call on the Biden administration to act now. Thank you.
Representation of the many people around this country and around the world that are paying attention to these issues, that are calling for an end to political repression in Rwanda, that are calling for freedom for the Hotel Rwanda hero, Paul Rusesabagina, and freedom for all political prisoners. Thank you so much, Simon. Fantastic. Next, we have Katrina Lantos. Katrina is representing the Lantos Foundation for Human Rights and Justice, which was established in the name of the courageous Congressman Tom Lantos, whose legacy we all know and admire and try to emulate as an advocate for U.S. engagement in human rights globally.
Hello. I'm Katrina Lantos Sweat, president of the Lantos Foundation for Human Rights and Justice.
Katrina, we turn to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Katrina Lantos Sweat, president of the Lantos Foundation for Human Rights and Justice. And in 2011, we had the distinct privilege of presenting to Paul Rusesabagina our highest honor, the Lantos Prize for Human Rights and Justice. As you've heard from the other speakers today, the events taking place in Rwanda are truly beyond belief. That any government should act this way, carrying out extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, and authoritarian repression of any form of dissent is clearly horrifying and should earn the condemnation of democratic and freedom-loving nations around the world. That Paul Rusesabagina, a true human rights hero, should be caught up in the web of Kagame's dictatorship is tragic for him, for his family, and for all who have been touched by his incredible story. We all know what a ruthless dictator will do to keep power. Paul's kidnapping and his sham trial are well-worn plays from the despot's playbook. But what bothers me most, as someone who has worked to advance human rights around the world, is the apathy being shown to Paul's case by the governments of the United States and Belgium. Paul renounced his Rwandan citizenship after the genocide. He became a Belgian citizen and shortly after a U.S. permanent resident. He received the United States' highest civilian honor when the Presidential Medal of Freedom was bestowed upon him. Yet our government and the Belgian government have done little to nothing to secure Paul's freedom. Instead, both governments which profess to value human rights in other parts of the world have not only turned a blind eye to Rwanda's complete descent into dictatorship, but have specifically averted their eyes and seemingly washed their hands of the horrific situation that one of their own has found himself in. By standing idly by when Paul was illegally kidnapped and brought to Kigali, by never uttering a word when he was marched in front of the Rwandan press like a trophy after a prolonged hunt, and by remaining silent during a sham trial that has never had a chance of a fair or impartial outcome, the US and Belgium have positioned themselves as enablers of President Kagame's plan to smear Paul Rusesabagina's story, his legacy, and his entire life. We call on the governments of the United States and Belgium to finally stand up for this brave man who is one of their own, to use their enormous influence to bring Paul home. And if the Rwandan government refuses to free him, to use every possible means to demonstrate that we will not rest until he is released. The Lantos Foundation submitted an extremely strong case to the US and EU governments in May of this year, calling for them to impose global Magnitsky sanctions against the Rwandan officials responsible for Paul's kidnapping. It is truly difficult to think of a case that is easier to prove than this, given that the Rwandan Minister of Justice himself admitted during a televised interview that the government paid for the private plane that was used to kidnap Paul and transport him to Rwanda against his will. Yet no actions have been taken against those officials or anyone else. This must change. And now is the time. We must get Paul Rusesabagina safely out of Rwanda and back home to his family. If, like so many Kagame critics before him, he dies or disappears under mysterious circumstances, there will be no words of solace or regret from the US or Belgian governments that will suffice. We can only hope that these governments choose to show some moral leadership before we reach that tragic point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katrina, for that powerful reminder that this is a call to the Rwandan government, but it is also a call to the government of the United States and the government of Belgium. So let us be clear, our demands, beginning with the Rwandan government, because we are here at their doorstep, at the embassy doorstep, right? The Rwandan government must immediately and unconditionally grant humanitarian relief to Paul Rusesabagina and ensure his physical protection wherever. Second, the Rwandan government must honor treaty obligations under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Third, Rwanda must respect the civil and political rights of all those within its jurisdiction as consistent with the principles of true democracy. Rwanda must stop the use of enforced disappearance and return all targeted individuals safely to their families. Rwanda must also respect freedom of expression and end the targeting of journalists wherever they are in the country, in the region, or elsewhere on the world. In addition, we call for Rwanda to stop the torture and killing of political prisoners and respect different political opinions, allowing the expression of a range of political views, ending the intimidation of critics, and recognizing the role of opposition and the importance of freedom of speech as a core democratic principle. For the US and Belgium, our demands are also clear. The international community must strongly demand the release, the humanitarian release of Paul Rusesabagina and his return to his family. The international community can and must condemn Rwanda's violation of international law and urgently demand the cessation of illegal extradition as well as the use of state-sanctioned assassinations and kidnapping of human rights defenders, opposition leaders, or other critics targeted by the Rwandan government. Countries such as the United States and Belgium must withhold all military sales and equipment and halt training and assisting of Rwandan troops subject to our demands, including the demands for the release of all political prisoners, such as Paul Rusesabagina, and all those highlighted today. There are hundreds of prisoners of conscience. We call out their names and call for their release. Some that you have heard today include Kidnapping, Amiable Carson, those who have been killed in South Africa, those who have been killed in Rwanda, like this in Rwanda. The list is so long. The forced disappearance of Bahati Wilson, the disappearance of Yatu, the extended arrest of Yula Hassan. The list is long. We call on the US and Belgium to lift up all these alarming cases, to use all political power to end repression and to investigate the human rights abuses being committed in Rwanda, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and around the world at the hands of Paul Rusesabagina and the RPF government. The sun is hot. At the hands of Paul Kagame, let us be clear. It is Paul Kagame that has brought us here, right? And it is Paul Kagame that can put an end to the abuse of human rights and put an end to the repression underway in Rwanda. We have questions. We will turn to those questions now. So those who are here, we will go here first, and then we will go to those who are joining us virtually. Your voice will be hopefully recorded. Just say your question where you are, and I will repeat it.
Okay. My name is Tom Dines. I'm president of the American Friends of the Czech Republic, of which Paul is an advisor and a good friend of both of us. So in this atmosphere of repression by Rwanda, what causes the current president of Rwanda to behave so weakly with so much insecurity? Because he doesn't enhance himself or his country, he in fact is a weakener of his country.
Thank you so much for that question and for the Friends of the Czech Republic for being here and also for acknowledging that Paul Rusesabagina has stood in solidarity for human rights around the world. We will take one more question and then we'll come to Claude. We hope you can answer both of those questions, okay? So the, yes. That question on what makes Paul Kagame do these types of atrocities to people like Paul Rusesabagina and the others listed today. But we will take the next question and then come back to answer it. Please go right ahead for the next question.
Unmute your mic.
Please unmute your mic and ask your question. We'll take two questions back to back and then give the response. Kevin, if you can, please unmute your mic and say the question.
Very good. What is the role of the Rwandan ambassadors in perpetrating violence against Paul Rusesabagina and his family?
We heard clearly. Thank you so much. So now we will go to Claude Kadabuke. Claude, who is a genocide survivor and a Rwandan, is well placed to answer that question. Please go right ahead.
All right, so we have two questions. One is what makes Paul Kagame act the way he does, so insecurely and violently? That's the first question. The second question is, what is the role of Rwandan ambassadors and Rwandan embassies in these acts? So starting with the first question, Paul Kagame has a long history, starting in Uganda, not in Rwanda, starting in Uganda in the 80s, killing people, innocent people, and he's used to getting away with it. Then he invaded Rwanda with the RPF, the Rwanda Patriotic Front, fought a 4-year war, killed hundreds of thousands of people to the tune of 1 million people being displaced from their homes. They chose to be homeless versus living in an area controlled by Paul Kagame, because Paul Kagame would call people in his army, the RPF army, would call and throw grenades into the crowds, and whoever survived, they would kill them with hand weapons. This happened for 4 years, leading up to the genocide. Then there is Paul Kagame's documented comments in the genocide. One, in Romeo Dallaire's book, he says, he asked Paul Kagame, can you stop the war and save the people? And he said no. He said, can you fight faster and win the war? This is during the time when Paul Rusesabagina and many others were sheltering people. I was sheltered, not at the hotel, but at multiple homes. I know the importance of sheltering people in such a violent time. During that time, Paul Kagame said, no, we're not going to win the war fast. We are going to do it in our own time. 3 weeks into the genocide, the RPF, a letter written by one Claude Lusaidi and Gerald Gahima, they wrote a letter to the UN and said, do not intervene. Anybody that intervenes, we're going to kill them. We're going to fight them. So this is the history of Paul Kagame. Then you have the invasion of the Congo. So he is used to doing all of this in the dark. He's used to doing all of this with no one shining a light on what he does. The reason he does this to so many people like Paul Rusesabagina, people like Aimable Karasira, who talks about how Paul Kagame and his army killed his parents. Gilbert Shaka, who just disappeared, and many others, is because they are shining a light on his crimes. How does he get away with it? He gets away with it because our money, our tax dollars, are used by the governments of the US, the European Union, Canada, the Commonwealth, and other countries that provide support to Rwanda, and he continues to enjoy impunity. Impunity is the biggest enemy. Impunity and indifference. Impunity and indifference are the two biggest enemies of the people. People like not only Paul Rusesabagina, but every person that is persecuted in Rwanda. That is the reason. So he gets away with it because he has powerful friends. He has the Bill Clintons. He has the Tony Blairs. He has the Rick Warrens, who are the king makers, who are the people who give him the power and the cover. When he's invaded the Congo and reports have come out, the US has fought to block the reports. That is why Paul Kagame keeps getting away with his crimes. The reason, I stated the reasons why he does it. Of course, he wants to commit crimes and get away with them. Now, number two is because he has all of this support. And number three is because the world does not know, and the world must know. We must tell the world the things that he does and who supports him, who gives him the money, who gives him the military support. You heard the demands. The US is one of his military supporters, and we absolutely must stop that. The second question, and I'll be quick, was What is the role of Rwandan ambassadors and the Rwandan embassies in these crimes, in the kidnapping of Paul Rusesabagina, but also surveilling Rwandans? I just want to give an example from down the street. A few months ago, somebody that worked here, right here, this embassy, intruded into a classroom that was talking about Paul Rusesabagina and Rwanda. Plenty of times we've held press conferences like this here in Washington, and the people who conduct surveillance on us have followed us in those conferences. They work for the embassy. Let me give you a personal testimony to end it. In 2018, I met the ambassador. But before I speak about that one, I want to speak about James Kimonyo, the ambassador who harassed Paul Rusesabagina, showed up at a press conference 2010 and accused Paul Rusesabagina of funding a terrorist group. We asked him for the evidence, and Mira was the moderator. He didn't have any. He said, I can't show you because it's a legal matter. A few weeks later, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Rwanda, Louise Mushikiwabo, who is now part of the Francophonie, came here to DC with the former general prosecutor, Rwanda's general prosecutor, Martin Boga. They made the same claim. Somebody asked them for the evidence. They showed a piece of paper with a transaction of a few $100s. And they said, this is the money that Paul Rusesabagina is sending to fund a terror group. Somebody looked at them and said, your words are cheap, because it was ridiculous.
Paul Rusesabagina was not in the United States.
Right. By the way, the statement they gave was a forged statement. So not only are they bad at maybe knowing how much it costs to fund a war, they're really bad at fabricating evidence. But so many people today, what's happening to Rusesabagina, what's happening to Karasira, what's happening to Idamange, what's happening to Shaka, what's happening to Mitsindo Viateur, and so many other people, they use fabricated evidence. And because they have the power inside the country, they get away with it, but they can't get away with it here. Now, James Kimonyo continued to harass Paul Rusesabagina unsuccessfully. Now, I do want to share now the other part of what the Rwandan embassies do around the world against Rwandans, ordinary and critics. Nobody gets away. They have a group called the Rwandan diaspora. They call themselves the Rwandan community abroad. That's the group that is used by the embassies to conduct surveillance on the communities. They pretend that they are an organization that is independent of the government, but they actually are a part of the government. It's a branch of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, ran by the embassies in multiple countries. There is a Rwandan community abroad of the DMV right here, DC, Maryland, Virginia. There is one. There's a Rwandan community of Atlanta. There's a Rwandan community of LA and other places. This is a real thing, and that's what they use to conduct surveillance, and that's how they track people's movements. They also have hate organizations run by the government, the CNLG, supposedly to fight against the genocide, but it's actually an organization that's used to spread hate and also surveil. There's also Ibuka, supposedly to speak up for survivors of genocide. It doesn't. It actually goes around harassing people and surveilling people. These are all branches of the the government of Rwanda, of the embassy. The embassy runs all of these organizations. The funding comes from the government of Rwanda. It comes from us. We pay taxes. They fund the Rwanda government. That government funds the ministry. The ministry funds these embassies. The embassy funds the activities that come to spy on not only Rwandans, but American citizens and citizens of other countries around the world. So that is how it works. That's what the embassies do. They are the center of surveillance in these countries, in the countries that they operate in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think there are two other questions. We will take those for those joining us virtually. Please go right ahead.
Yes, there is a question for Corinne and Anais. I'm going to add them to the feed right now and make sure that everybody can see them at home. The question is, if you could have 5 minutes with President Biden, what would you ask of him? What practical action could he take to ensure the safe release of your father and his safe return to you?
So first, during his election, President Joe Biden pledged to put human rights and democracy at the forefront of his foreign policy. And in addition to this, he's also, like my father, Paul Rusesabagina, a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, of the Lantos Award for Human Rights, and as well as the Freedom Awards from the National Civil Rights Museum. He received these awards because of his advocacy for human rights. And that's exactly what our father did. And that is exactly why our father is currently sitting in prison, being silenced. So the first thing I would ask President Joe Biden is to honor his promise and to walk the talk and help us bring our father home.
Also, President Biden has gone through a lot of personal trauma that we share with his family as well, but with also many other people. And that's why President Biden, I think, is so relatable for many people. And then from that perspective, we would love to ask him like a personal ask to help us bring our father to reunite with our family, because we know that President Biden is a family man and he wouldn't wish that on anybody. And from the same perspective, like Karen said, President Biden has always advocated for human rights. And it's now to show again for Africans as well, human rights. And so it's now to show and walk the talk. We would love to get this 5 minutes with him. And again, that's also why we're here, to continue talking about my father's case in the hope that we can get this 5 minutes with him to tell him our plea and get our father back.
Thank you so much. 5 minutes with the Rusesabagina family. We know that this is something Joe Biden can do. Is there another question?
Yes, the case of Paul Rusesabagina, a clear and obvious transgression of all international standards and codes of legal due process. What should and could the international legal community be doing to force Rwanda to conform to the accepted international legal process that it is breaking?
Wonderful.
So thank you.
One nation.
You have to speak loud.
Thank you for the question. So ultimately, we're proceeding in the East African Court. We're already filed 2 petitions, one with the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention and one with the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, seeking review of Paul's cases. And so we are pursuing international legal measures to try to bring attention to what's taken place and the denial of Paul's human rights. But ultimately, as I think I've already said, and as other speakers have said today, this isn't an international law remedy. The real remedy will be a diplomatic effort on behalf undertaken by the United States, Europe, and others of goodwill, including people who consider themselves to be friends of Rwanda and friends of the Rwandan government, to persuade the Rwandan government that it's in Rwanda's interest as well to bring Paul home on a humanitarian as a humanitarian gesture, on a humanitarian release. And I can't stress that enough. This isn't about one side versus the other. Currently, I think it's in everybody's interest to have Paul come home safely, to make sure nothing happens to him in prison, and that he come home soon, so that Rwanda's standing in the international community, Rwanda's reputation, Rwanda's access to not only aid but also future meetings, future gatherings, future efforts in which Rwanda may have an interest, will be available to it. And that, I think, is why I am hopeful that, and I've been saying this from the start. This is nothing new. And that's why I'm hopeful that once we have a verdict and the international community is quite clear about its desire to see Paul returns quickly and safely, that the Rwandan government will seriously consider that. Thank you.
I think we have one more question and it's for Paul.
Thank you so much, Peter. So one more question, please go right ahead and read the question. And I think it will be Claude who responds. Please go ahead with the question.
The Rwandan authorities have been expending a great deal of time and resources promoting what are clearly blatant lies and propaganda, both through print and broadcast media and online. How hard does it begin to get the truth of Rwanda and how current President Paul Kagame runs it to the people that matter?
You mind repeating, Kevin, please?
The Rwandan authorities have been expending a great deal of time and resources promoting what are clearly blatant lies and propaganda, both through print and broadcast media and online. How hard has it been to get the truth of Rwanda and current President Paul Kagame and how he runs it to the people that matter?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. That is stated greatly. The government of Rwanda spends a great deal of money on spreading lies and propaganda. In fact, back in, I believe it was around 2012, 2013, I saw an invoice of $250,000 that the Rwandan government was paying to one PR firm for to upkeep their image. In February, we saw the Rwandan Minister of Justice, I call him the Minister of Justice. The Rwandan Minister of Justice was holding a consultation about the Paul Rusesabagina case with some Western PR firm, a very expensive one. And because of that, because they spent so much money, they have state infrastructure and they have powerful supporters, a lot of the media has been flooded with lies and propaganda by the government of Rwanda. It's taken many, many, many years for the truth to come out. Part of it, part of the issue is Rwandans who don't speak up and actually tell their own stories. And fortunately, thankfully, many are starting to do that, and I am grateful for those who are doing that. The media has been slow to react to Paul Kagame's and the Rwandan government and the RPF's propaganda because it's easy. They tell a simple story, but it's much more complex than it actually looks. So Kagame is very skilled at running the propaganda. It has been difficult, but it's catching on now. When you look at the media, at the reports, now it's becoming more and more and more about what actually happens. And it's thanks to the voices that never wavered, the voices that never stopped. And I would just like to say that those of us who are here, we have no plan to stop. We are unwavering, and we are going to make sure that the world knows, that the world hears this, and the world understands and knows who the real Paul Kagame is, who his supporters are, what they can do about it, and we're going to make sure that it's done. In the same way that Black people, as a Black person standing here, if nobody spoke up, if nobody resisted slavery, I would be somewhere in the field working. If nobody stood up years later for civil rights, they would be for whites only and colored. It's taken voices, it's taken small voices in the history of the world, apartheid South Africa, and so many others, is because people have have taken a stance, people of conscience, and we are going to continue to take a stance, and we are not backing down. We are determined to make sure that the real story is told, as difficult as it may be. It's no longer as difficult because back in the days, people used to use little pamphlets. Now we have social media. Everybody can tell a story. For those of you following, everybody watching, use your social media to tell the stories of the people who are suppressed by not only Paul Kagame, but other dictators around the world. But the story of Paul Kagame must be told. It must be told in its full truth, and we are determined to do that.
Brilliant. Couldn't be better said. Thank you all. To those who have come out, 90-degree weather, many of us have been very cautious with COVID coming out to public press conferences and events. But we took a chance, we came, and we just thank you all for it. We thank those who have joined us virtually. We know that there are many who will continue to follow this issue because of all of you. So we ask you to take a moment today to send an email or to call your member of Congress. Let them know you are paying attention to this issue. Let them know and that you understand the power that we as people of conscience around the world have to hold up human rights and justice, not only for people like Paul Rusesabagina and all those who have been targeted in Rwanda, but for those who are suffering depression around the world. So, take out your phones, send a text, send an email, do it today. We have within our power to continue to have the world's eye focused on this issue, in spite of all the Rwandan government is trying to do. So do your part. Seize your power. Do it today. We thank especially the family, the legal team, the Rusesabagina family, for all your courage in making sure that events like today happen, that all of us are able to contribute in solidarity. We thank also the advocacy groups, Advocacy Network for Africa, Africans Rising for Justice, Peace, and Dignity, Friends of the Congo, as well as the Africa Great Lakes Action Network. It is advocacy with community groups that care, that did bring them to apartheid, still fighting for environmental justice today, demanding the world we know future generations must. So we thank you all for your diligence. We thank you for your courage. We ask you to stay on it. Stay on it. We all come together to say, not on our watch, use our voices until freedom comes. Not only to those political prisoners, but to all and all the people. So we thank you for joining us today. We ask you to stay connected. If you need additional information, any of the groups sponsoring today can provide that. Please stay in touch. We know that this is painful, we know it's tough. But we also know that those powerful words, the art of the world universe bends towards justice. And what we're doing today, online and in person, is bending that arc. So you all keep pushing, keep fighting, never give up till justice is served. Thank you.
Todd and Simon, could we come for this picture?
Anybody else want to be in the picture?
Record.